So it's a great topic. Thank you for asking. I could be here for hours, but I'm not going to be. So I need to give you the 5-minute succinct download on that. So to be brutally frank about it, the cultivation of asana as we know it today is mainly a 90 to 100 year history. And Krishnamacharya has a big role to play in that. He would have consulted with, checked in with the likes of Kuvalyananda. So in a way, those are my two granddaddies, yogi granddaddies. And but Krishnamacharya was quite innovative with the development of asanas, postures, new postures, and especially in the world of standing poses. And he believed in the Surya Namaskara, the sun salute, which only has about a 250-year history, so late 1700s, but in terms of the way you see it now, vinyasa, flowing, dynamic, that is only really since Krishnamacharya putting that in which is 1930s developing that stuff, okay? So that's 90 years. But because of its physical, and you might call it low impact, physical activity, exercise, it did hit the right notes, definitely, by the time that type of stuff via the Ashtanga method got into the so-called Western world, right? This is when I was stepping into it, in the 90s. And then definitely in the last, again, 10 years, So the idea of flow, moving, really is very foreign to asana. It's completely foreign to asana, and it's not exactly correct of vinyasa. But it is what it is. In terms of it being its own movement, activity, do some stretches, poses, that's fine. In terms of that being representative of Hatha Yoga, not really, okay? It may not matter. You might just be into, I'm into flow, move, breathe, stretch. Then that's great. Then that's what it is. But if you're into the history of yoga, Hatha Yoga within that, the effects of that, the benefits of it, that as a spiritual approach, okay, then we actually have to look a little bit more into this subject matter. So then you'll see that asana, even though it has mainly, in the way we know it in a modern sense, been cultivated in the last 90 to 100 years, has a much longer history. It's not fair to say it was just sitting postures, 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 years ago. But of course that was the main emphasis, because that was the description of a sitting asana that you would do other practices in. And some would be very auspicious, beneficial for you. Some would ground you. Some were a little bit easier. So you have these different names. And of course asana is mentioned in the Yoga Sutra. So that's maybe 1,800 years ago. There's reference before that. You see it coming out in some of these other ascetic traditions, you see. So what you had then are peculiar postures of the body that were held for an extremely long time. And then they were part of tapas. But they are almost like penances that people would take on and do, holding the body in a particular way, like standing on one foot for a long time. And I'm talking hours, days, doing that into years, though they might change the leg, but that was their thing, okay? And of course you've all heard of the guy who holds his arm up for 20 years, and that is still a practice that goes on today. But within this realm, what was the early history of asana? At the same time, in ascetic and in meditative practices, asana was part of that. But again, that's as a sitting. Comes up in the Yoga Sutra. The commentary on the Yoga Sutra, which you might call collectively Patanjala Yoga Shastra, which is probably 6th-ish, 7th-ish century, right? If it is one author or two authors, that's for the academic debate. maybe Vyasa, maybe it's just one as Patanjali, but that is the time period, so we're going back about 1400 years. Then you see, I think it's 13 asanas described, and it's fair to say one or two in there are more than just sitting, like I'm sitting now. The equivalent of like a Baddha Konasana in there, which if you ask me, then says, hey, there was more than just trying to sit there in Baddha Konasana, because as anybody who does modern asana yoga today will find out that that Baddha Konasana is very difficult to just sit in. So there's all this other prep work to it. Then the early Hatha Yoga text really didn't bring up asana much. But what Hatha Yoga identified was mudras, okay? And mudras are actually asanas with a very powerful bandha with particular breath retention. So just to do that alone meant you had to be quite connected with the body and able to do particular poses, though none of them were detailed or prescribed in any of those texts. But then those texts are purposely scanty, because it was like, go learn with the teacher, and we're going to tell you these key points and how the energy works internally. So then when Hatha Yoga in the 15th century, so about 600 years ago, got into its form that we've been able to progress with since, it then had some, we would call them preparatory asanas based on that text, but trust me, if you look at those poses, they are full on, other than the sitting ones. The ones that are non-sitting are full on back bend, full on twist, full on balancing, etc. Which means you don't just start and do that, which means there would have to be a lot of prep work. So it's fair to say, though not documented, the cultivation of asanas has to be at least 1,000 years, if not longer, but not commonplace. It only started to have more of a non-recluse, non-ascetic, non-monastic influence, really, 600-700 years ago and on. And the innovations in asanas are more like the last 350 years, with actually most of the asanas you find in the Ashtanga Vinyasa, Iyengar, etc., are to be found in particular texts. That you can't really trace it across one, because let's say Krishnamacharya in his own work would have been influenced by a few different sources and his own experience. So the names might come up in a different text, the sequence and the approach from another one. And all that is within a 250 to 300 year at most history. But you could say the genius and the benefit that we get today was the putting that together. Now, admittedly, the putting that together of modern asana, which is sort of the Krishnamacharya, later Pattabhi Jois, Iyengar kind of branched sideways from it, was more physical, yeah. And so, whereas Iyengar took out a lot of the movement jumpings and identified the asanas, and a lot of time with those asanas. Pattabhi Jois would have kept all that movement jumping in it. But then that's where it becomes problematic. You can have that in the sun salutes and the standing poses, which really, their history is only 90 to 100 years, primarily, okay? And then the rest of the asanas, if you keep mixing up, jumping, moving around, well, actually you change the physiology of them, you see? So that's why I like to divide asana practice to what might be more physical activity, sun salute standing, but then you need to change the tone as you get to the floor. They're still physically demanding, right? You do a Dhanurasana, it's demanding. You balance in Kukutasana on your arms, that's demanding. But they're focused, slow breath, tuned in, and then there's a period of neutral after it, see? So those asanas that I've just mentioned have a old long history, must be up to 1,000 years, and I would say longer, but we see it documented at least 600+ years, okay? And I know things like Kukutasana, etc., are documented in some of the other Vaishnava literature, over 1,000 years. So that is the history we have today. A greater wealth of material. But keep in mind, the Hatha Yoga was focused on breath and then mudra activity. So you had a skill in the asana and you really could work the breath, and then there'd be inner spiritual activity. So the asana work really, you could say, had a peripheral tension, because it was more about how you could manage all that in the mudra sense. And having done all the mudras myself, except the cutting the tongue one, they are pretty intense if you're going to really do them. Okay, and doing advanced series asana stuff is actually quite simple in comparison, right? So what we have today is a lot of work around the asana, which is fine. So then let's call it asana being developed, some in a very physical way, some in a conditioning way, and that may or may not lead you into the more profound approaches within Hatha Yoga, which involve breath retention, and maybe using the mudra. See? So, of course, I'll have all that written out, detailed, and publishable articles at a certain point. But there are great researchers in the Hatha Yoga at the moment, such as Mallinson, Birch, Singleton, on the Patanjali Mass. And these guys, I think, are doing very good work in terms of the philology of it, the texts, etc. And my job is really to be between that and the physiology, and try understand, having practiced it all, the tradition, the poses, the techniques, and what that means in terms of the body, and then it as its own spiritual path practice.